and the origins of life. Okay, again, this is theory. This is kind of what we've pieced together based on the evidence that we can see, and it isn't all sorted out. And there's a lot of actually, questions about this as well. But this is what we understand, or how the universe formed and eventually started to form life. Okay. All right. So we're going to do a timeline first. All right. We're going to start here at, let's start there. 4.5 billion years ago. Okay, and these break down into time periods called eons. I'll put it down here. And the first one is called the Chaldean. And it goes until about 4 billion years ago. And 4.5 billion years ago was approximately when the Earth formed. Four billion years ago is when the Moon formed. And in between this time period, you had a bunch of comets hitting the Earth, bringing with it ice, which eventually melted into water. And that's what brought water to the Earth. Okay, so the Chaldean is pretty simple, Chaldean eon. Okay, but then we move into the Archean eon.
Is the bacteria archaea, is that where that stems from?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So 3.8 billion years ago, we have the first prokaryotes. Which were likely archaea bacteria. Okay, but we didn't really get much else out of the Archean eon. And the next eon is the Proterozoic. And what we got at about 2 billion years is Cyanobacteria. All right, what are cyanobacteria and why is that significant? What is cyan? Yeah, right? So this is photosynthetic bacteria. Okay? All right, but then let's see, when does that?
Does that say 202 billion? I can't see this.
2 BYA.
2 BYA.
Okay, shortly after that, you have, I know this isn't drawn to scale. So just 500 million years later, you have our first eukaryotes. Okay? And what had to happen for eukaryotes to evolve? Yes, yes.
Like one prokaryote went inside of another
What's that called?
Endosymbiosis.
Yeah, so endosymbiosis. We now have two organisms, prokaryotes, now living together. Okay, and then, let's see, this is still in the Protozoic, yes. At 1 billion years ago, you then have multicellular organisms.
Is that 2 BYA or 2.5 BYA for the cyanide?
Cyanobacteria is 2.2, yeah. 2.5 is just the beginning of the Proterozoic. So then you have multicellular organisms. At 500 million years ago, we have the start of the Phanerozoic. And the evolution of plants and animals. And then during this time period, we also have what's called here. Actually, let's put it down here. From 500 to around 400 million years, you have what's called the Cambrian explosion. And we'll talk more about that when we get into animals. But this is when animals then started to diversify, and we start seeing the phyla that we see today all evolved during this time period.
Good question.
Yes?
What was cyanobacteria again?
So they are photosynthetic bacteria. They are single-celled, so they don't have chloroplasts like our plant cells do, but they probably had chloroplast-like individual cells. And there are current cyanobacteria that still are prokaryotes, but they can photosynthesize. Okay, so that's our timeline for when life started, and also the development since then, which have allowed the radiation of animals. Okay. All right, so before we watch this, so the moon is actually an important for many reasons in the Earth, but can you think of some of these? I want you guys to actually think about this. So what would happen if we didn't have the moon? What sort of biological or geological processes? Okay? Yeah, so discuss amongst yourselves, then we'll see how many you got. This occurred through a spontaneous means, right? So we don't really know exactly how things got together, but there is a bunch of evidence that kind of points to this happening during the conditions that the Earth was in at the time. So if you were going to design a cell, what would you need? Okay, talk to your neighbor and come up with the basic components you would need in the most primitive of cells. Very basics, you're going to need a membrane, plasma membrane.
So you're talking about the very first cell that was like, that ever appeared on Earth. You're talking about like a prokaryotic single cell organism. So
Right,
you
so-
need a nucleoid.
Okay, so
Because that's
what's the nucleoid?
It's the DNA package.
Okay, the DNA. So you had to have nucleic acids, right? It had to have some nucleic acid. Do you think DNA or RNA came first? RNA, why? It is simpler, yeah. It's single-stranded. Okay, yeah, so it is thought that RNA actually came first. Another thing about RNA, what are ribosomes made out of? RNA, right? They're made out of RNA. So the machinery for making proteins is also in the nucleic acid. Okay, so RNA is thought to be the first nucleic acid. You need a membrane. What else do you need? Okay, you need some way to, right, some way to get energy somehow, right? So, yeah, you would need a cytoplasm, right? And in the cytoplasm, you would need to have amino acids and some way to make energy, right? Okay, those are the kind of basics then. All right, so what scientists have tried to do, and what was highlighted in the video lecture, was the Miller and Urey experiment, where they tried to simulate the conditions of the atmosphere at that time, 3.8 billion years ago. And it was nothing like our atmosphere now. Most of the Earth was probably covered in volcanoes. It was very hot, didn't have any oxygen. There was probably a lot of sulfur and methane gases. And so they simulated a little cycling vent where they had precipitation and these gases and electricity. And they came up with amino acids and a few other, not the full macromolecules, but the monomers that made these macromolecules within there. But they didn't make a cell, right? Couldn't simulate making a cell out of nothing, but close. All right, so they did this experiment again in 2008, okay, and they made some adjustments to the atmosphere. They tried to add more of, I think it was, methane or something, and they were able to get more monomers, more amino acids out of the same number of cycles. So getting closer, but there's a few other things which kind of add to our knowledge that this probably happened. One is called the Murchison Meteorite. Okay, so there was a meteorite which hit Australia in the 1960s, I believe. And they went and studied the meteorite, and it had amino acids, it had nitrogenous bases, it had carbohydrates. It didn't have any cells on it, but it had all those things which were important for making energy and making proteins. So the conditions which made that meteorite were probably similar to early Earth at the time. So we established that RNA was probably the first nucleic acid. And then another evidence that this could have occurred, which applies to the plasma membrane, are the formation of protocells. Okay, and protocells are basically membranes, lipid membranes, which form spontaneously. Okay, and they found this clay called Montmorillonite, sounds like a Book of Mormon name, which when added to conditions similar to volcanic eruptions at the time with heat, will form these protocells. Okay, so they'll form lipid membranes. They don't have anything in them, but they will form spontaneously and form this separation between a cell, a protocell. Okay, so they haven't been able to produce a cell out of nothing, but they do show signs that it's going towards there, and it's thought that the early conditions of Earth were just the right conditions to form not only the membrane, but also your nucleic acids, and everything required for a prokaryote. Okay, so moving a little further, or any questions on that? Okay, so moving a little further on the timeline, this is atmospheric oxygen over the billions of years since cellular life has appeared. All right, so what occurred right here at 3.8 billion years ago? Okay, so this is our first prokaryote. All right, so let's add some other detail. When would be the next step on our timeline?
2 billion years ago.
Okay, what happened there?
The
Cyanobacteria. Okay, and then when do we get eukaryotes?
1.5.
Okay. Then multicellular. Okay, so what is significant about cyanobacteria and these oxygen levels? Okay, photosynthesis, which produces oxygen. Okay, good. So which came first, the mitochondria or the chloroplast? Okay, probably chloroplast, right? Because you need oxygen in order to make or to allow the mitochondria to work. And so our formation of eukaryotes couldn't occur until enough oxygen had been released into the atmosphere to be usable by them. Okay? All right. Any other questions? All right. 15 minutes left. There's just a little review worksheet on MySVU. Got